Exhortation to Resolve on Buddhahood by the Dhyana Master and Pureland Patriarch, Shramana Sheng'an Shixian of Hangzhou's Brahma Heaven Monastery. This unworthy, foolish, and lowly common monk, Shixian, weeping tears of blood, bows down and makes this deeply felt proclamation to the present great assembly, as well as to the rest of this world's men and women of pure faith. I only pray that, extending kindness and compassion, they will briefly listen and reflect. I have heard that among the essential gateway methods for entering the path, generating the Bodhi resolve is paramount. Among the critically urgent responsibilities involved in cultivation, the establishment of vows is foremost. Once vows have been established, then beings may be brought across to liberation. When the resolution has been brought forth, then the path to Buddhahood may be perfected. If one only fails to generate this expansively great resolve and establish solid vows, then even if one courses on through kalpas as numerous as dust motes, one will still continue to abide in cyclic existence. Even though one may possess some achievement in cultivation, it is all only futilely endured suffering. Hence, the Floral Adornment Sutra states, if through forgetting it, one loses the Bodhi resolve while cultivating all manner of wholesome dharmas, these amount to demonic karmic actions. If this is the case for merely forgetting it, how much the more would it be so where one has not yet even generated it? Thus one should realize that if he aspires to study the vehicle of the Tathagata, it is essential to first become equipped with the generation of the Bodhisattva vow. This is not something which can be delayed. As for the distinctions involved in the mind's aspirations, their characteristic features are numerous. If one failed to point them out and explain them, how could one proceed to develop them? Now, for the sake of the Great Assembly, we shall speak of them in summary fashion. The characteristic features are eightfold, as follows. They are the so-called deviant or correct, genuine or false, great or small, and one-sided or perfect. What then does one mean by deviant or correct, genuine or false, great or small, and one-sided or perfect? There exists in the world a class of practitioner pursuing cultivation with singular directness, but does not investigate his own mind and merely possesses an awareness of external matters. In some cases, he may seek for personal profit and offerings. In some cases, he may be fond of fame. In some cases, he may covet the desire-based pleasures of the present age. And in some cases, he may look with hopefulness to karmic rewards in the future. When one generates a resolve of this sort, this is what qualifies as deviant. It may be, on the other hand, that one does not seek for profit or fame, and does not covet desire-based pleasures or karmic rewards. Rather, one's efforts are solely for the sake of transcending cyclic birth and death and realizing Bodhi. When one generates a resolve of this sort, this is what qualifies as correct. As regards those above, one should seek in every mind moment to search out the path of the Buddha. As regards those below, one should strive in every thought to transform beings through teaching them. On hearing of the far-reaching and distant length of the Buddha path, one should not retreat in timidity. On observing that beings are difficult to bring across to liberation, one should not allow oneself to become weary with disgust. This is just as when one ascends a 10,000-meter mountain. One must be determined then to climb up to its very summit. And it is just as when one erects a 9-level stupa. In doing so, one must certainly complete it through creating its crowning story. When one generates resolve of this sort, this is what qualifies as genuine. It may be that one has created karmic offenses, and yet does not repent of them. And it may be that one has committed transgressions, and yet fails to do away with them. It may be that one is inwardly turbid, while outwardly acting as if clear. It may be that one acts industriously at the beginning, and yet becomes indolent in the end. It may be that, even though one possesses fine thoughts, they are for the most part admixed with concerns about reputation and wealth. And it may be that, even though one has taken up wholesome dharmas, one remains defiled by offense-laden karma. When one generates a resolve of this sort, this is what qualifies as false. One resolves, when the realm of sentient beings has come to an end, only then shall my vows come to an end. When the path to the realization of Bodhi has become perfected, only then shall my vows be perfected. When one generates a resolve of this sort, this is what qualifies as great. It may be that one contemplates the 3 realms as like a prison, looks upon cyclic birth and death as like an enemy, aspires only to achieve one's personal liberation, and does not desire to bring other people across to liberation. If one generates a resolve of this sort, this is what qualifies as small. It may be that one perceives that beings and the Buddha's path exist outside of one's own mind, and that guided by this perception, one aspires to bring those beings across to liberation and perfect that path. In a circumstance of this sort, one remains unable to forget one's own meritorious service, and remains unable to extinguish attachment to one's own knowledge and views. If one generates a resolve of this sort, this is what qualifies as one-sided. It may be that realizing one's own nature is identical to that of beings. One aspires to bring them across to liberation. It may be that realizing one's own nature corresponds to the Buddha path. One consequently aspires to perfect it. It may be that one does not perceive even a single dharma existing apart from the mind. And it may be that one employs a mind cognizing emptiness to generate vows rooted in emptiness, to implement practices grounded in emptiness, and to realize the fruits of cognizing emptiness. All of this while remaining free of the view that there is any characteristic feature of emptiness which can be apprehended at all. If one generates a resolve of this sort, this is what qualifies as perfect. When one understands these 8 types of distinctions, one then understands how to carry on analytic reflection. When one understands how to carry on analytic reflection, one understands how to carry out riddance and implementation. When one understands how to carry out riddance and implementation, one becomes able to correctly generate the resolve. What is meant by analytic reflection? It refers to an ongoing analysis of and reflection upon this resolve, which we generate, whereby we recognize whether it is deviant, whether it is correct, whether it is genuine, whether it is false, whether it is great, whether it is small, whether it is one-sided, or whether it is perfect. What is meant by riddance and implementation? It refers to ridding oneself of the deviant, ridding oneself of the false, ridding oneself of the small, and ridding oneself of the one-sided, while simultaneously implementing the correct, implementing the genuine, implementing the great, and implementing the perfect. When one generates a resolve of this sort, one then succeeds in carrying forth with what qualifies as the genuine and correct generation of the Bodhi resolve. This Bodhi resolve is the king among all forms of goodness. It is certainly the case that there are causal bases upon which one then becomes able to generate it. Now, when we speak of causal basis, generally speaking, there are 10 categories. Of what do these 10 consist? The first is mindfulness of the extreme kindness of the Buddha. The second is mindfulness of the kindness of one's parents. The third is mindfulness of the kindness of teachers and seniors. The fourth is mindfulness of the kindness of benefactors. The fifth is mindfulness of the kindness of beings. The sixth is mindfulness of the sufferings in cyclic birth and death. The seventh is reverence for one's own spiritual mind. The eighth is repentance of one's karmic obstacles. The ninth is the aspiration to gain rebirth in the Pureland. The 10th is mindful concern that right dharma long endure. What is intended by mindfulness of the extreme kindness of the Buddha? This is in reference to when our Shakyamuni Tathagata himself initially generated the resolve. It was for our sake that he coursed in the Bodhisattva Path, passing through a countless number of kalpas, undergoing in full measure every sort of suffering. Whenever we have created karma, the Buddha has felt anguished pity for us and set forth skillful expedients to teach us. Even so, we have been so foolish that we have failed to realize that we should have faith in and accept such teaching. Whenever we have fallen into the hells, the Buddha again ached with compassion and wished to take on such sufferings for us. However, our karma has been so heavy that he was unable to rescue and extricate us from such difficulties. When we regained rebirth in the human realm, the Buddha employed skillful means to influence us to plant roots of goodness, and then, in life after life, followed along after us, his mindfulness never abandoning us for even a moment. When the Buddha first came into the world, we were still sunken in misery. Now that we have regained the human body, the Buddha has already passed into cessation. What karmic transgressions have we committed to be born in the Dharma-ending age? What merit have we created to be able to leave the home life? What karmic obstacles have we generated to be unable to personally view his golden body? What good fortune indeed that we now personally encounter is sharira. And so one reflects in this fashion. Had we failed to plant roots of goodness, how could we have succeeded in hearing the Dharma of the Buddha? Had we not heard the Dharma of the Buddha, how could we even be aware of constantly receiving these kindnesses of the Buddha? These kindnesses and these meritorious qualities are difficult to describe even by comparing them to a mountain. If we were to fail to generate the vast and magnificent resolve, course in the Bodhisattva Path, establish the Dharma of the Buddha, and rescue beings by bringing them across to liberation, then, even were we to crush our own body and splinter our own bones, how could we be able to repay this? This is the first of the causal basis for generation of the Bodhi resolve. What then is intended by mindfulness of the kindness of one's parents? One reflects, what heartache I feel recalling the intense labors of my parents in giving birth to me. For 10 months and 3 years, carrying me in the womb and nursing me, placing me in the dry and getting rid of the wet, swallowing the bitter and giving up the sweet, so that I then succeeded in becoming a man. They pointed out to me with hopefulness how I might carry on the family's good name and tradition of making offerings and paying reverence to its spirits. Now, since we have already left the home life, we are, through exaggeration, called sons of the Buddha, and are, although unworthy of the name, referred to as Shramanas. It is on this account that we do not carry out the offerings of delicacies to the family spirits, and do not lend any assistance by paying reverence or sweeping at their gravesites. While they are still alive, we are unable to provide for their nourishment. Once they have died, we are unable to guide forth their spirits. Thus, as regards the world, we greatly diminish its resources. As regards that which lies beyond the world, we provide no genuine benefit there either. If thus we are failures with respect to both of these paths, then such heavy karmic offenses would be difficult to escape. When we reflect in this manner, we see that it is only through constantly coursing in the Buddha's path throughout thousands of births across hundreds of kalpas, spanning the 10 directions and the 3 periods of time, that we will be able to universally bring beings across to liberation. If we do this, then it will not be solely one's own father and mother from a single lifetime who shall benefit. Rather, one's fathers and mothers from life after life shall all be the recipients of extrication and rescue. And it shall not be but a single person's fathers and mothers, but rather the fathers and mothers of everyone, who will all be able to leap over and ascend. This is the second of the causal basis, or generation of the Bodhi resolve. What then is intended by mindfulness of the kindness of teachers and seniors? One reflects, although my father and mother were able to give birth to and raise up my physical body, still, if it were not for my worldly teachers and seniors, I would not understand propriety or righteousness. If it were not for my transcendental teachers and seniors, I would not understand the Dharma of the Buddha. If I failed to have an awareness of ceremonial propriety and righteousness, then I would be identical to other classes of beings. If I failed to understand the Dharma of the Buddha, then what distinction would there be between me and the common person? The fact that we now possess a rather coarse awareness of ceremonial propriety and righteousness, and now possess a general understanding of the Buddha's Dharma, wear the Kashaya robe, and are personally imbued with the codes of moral restraint. These emblems of extremely weighty kindness were all gained from our teachers and seniors. If we were now to strive for the achievement of lesser sorts of fruits of the path, we would only be able to accomplish our own self-benefit. But if we now, for the sake of the priorities of the great vehicle, make a universal vow to benefit others, then the two classes of teachers and seniors, both the worldly and the transcendental, will all receive benefits from this. This is the third of the causal basis for generation of the Bodhi resolve. What then is intended by mindfulness of the kindness of benefactors? One reflects. That which I rely on for daily use is certainly not something which comes from me. The 2 meal times of gruel and of rice, the clothing appropriate to the 4 seasons, the necessities for treating illness, everything used by the body or consumed as sustenance. These are all produced through the work of others and then brought forth for me to use. As for those benefactors, they must exhaust their strength in personally cultivating the fields, and even then find it difficult to make a living to feed the family. As for me, I sit here in peace and receive food from others, perhaps even then not finding it agreeable. As for those benefactors, though they may be ceaselessly busy at sowing for others, they may still be in difficult straits themselves. As for me, I am well clothed and even have more than I need. I should know to be sparing. As for those benefactors, they live where the gates are made of rushes and the windows are made of grass, enduring disturbances and troubles for their entire lives. As for myself, I abide in vast halls and vacant courtyards, wandering in leisure to the very end of each year. For me to take the fruits of their labors as a contribution to my own reclusive life, is this a matter which makes the mind feel at ease? For me to take the benefits which they have earned as the basis for my own personal convenience, is this a circumstance which accords with principle? Were I to fail to carry forth the simultaneous exercise of compassion and wisdom, while also accumulating the 2 adornments of merit and wisdom, if the Dhyana providing faithful thus remain unable to absorb the benefits from their kindness, and beings thus could not receive appropriate reward for their generosity, then there would be a measure of repayment of indebtedness remaining, due even on each grain of rice and on each inch of thread. As a result, the retribution for evil deeds will become a difficult consequence to escape. This is the 4th of the causal basis for generation of the Bodhi resolve. What then is intended by mindfulness of the kindness of beings? One reflects. From far off kalpas ago on forward to the present, other beings and I have served each other as fathers and mothers in lifetime after lifetime. In this there have been kindnesses they have proffered on us. Although now separated from those lives, and hence so confused that we do not recognize each other, when we reflect on this principle, how can we fail to reciprocate? How can one know that those beings who now wear fur and carry horns are not once children from the past? How can one know that those who are now but wriggling worms, larvae, and flying insects were not previously my father? It is commonly seen that for those who separate from their parents while still young, once grown, they forget their faces entirely. How much the more would this be the case for those with whom I possess that condition of their having been a previous life relative? This being the case, then it is difficult to remember whether they were named Zhang or named Wang. As for those relatives, who among us would be aware of their screams down in the hells, or their turning about in the realm of the hungry ghosts, undergoing such suffering and pain? As for their hunger and desolation, how would they be able to present an appeal to us? Although I do not now see or hear them, they are certainly longing to be saved and seeking to be rescued. Were it not for the sutras, one would be unable to reveal this state of affairs. Were it not for the Buddha, one would be unable to utter this description. Those others, possessed as they are of erroneous views, how could they be qualified to even know of this? Thus it is that when a bodhisattva observes crickets and ants, he realizes that each of them was his father or his mother sometime in the past. He realizes that each of them shall become Buddhas in the future. He constantly ponders how to benefit them, and he continues to bear in mind the responsibility of repaying their kindnesses. This is the fifth of the causal basis for generation of the Bodhi resolve. What then is intended by mindfulness of the sufferings of cyclic birth and death? One reflects, from far off kalpas ago on forward to the present, I and other beings have constantly dwelt in cyclic birth and death, and even now have not yet succeeded in gaining liberation. Whether it has been among humans, up in the heavens, here in this realm, or off in other regions, our emerging and sinking away has been in a myriad different forms. This ascending and submerging occurs so suddenly that one moment we are in the heavens, and then, in a trice, we are back among humans. From there, in a mere instant, we may fall back down into the hells, among animals, or into the midst of the hungry ghosts. One may go forth from the black gates of hell in the morning, and then return again in the evening. One may depart from the iron cave temporarily, but then return and enter it yet again. When one climbs the mountain of knives, there remains no place on the body where the skin remains intact. When one climbs the tree of swords, then every inch of the body becomes sliced open. Hot iron does not get rid of hunger. When one swallows it, the liver and intestines are all scorched into ruination. It is hard for molten copper to cure a person's thirst. When one drinks it down, the bones and flesh are all burned into a paste. When sharp saws slice open the body, though cut apart, it joins itself back together. Then an artful wind arises, which blows upon it and causes it, though already dead, to come back to life. In the city of fierce fire, one must bear listening to the pitiful misery of screaming and howling. Where hell dwellers are being stewed in a cauldron, one hears only the sounds of intense agony. When in the cold hells, the icy cold first starts to harden the body into ice. Its form becomes similar to the closed bud of a blue lotus. Once the blood vessels and flesh have been split open by expansion of the ice, the body then resembles the fully blossomed red lotus. In just a single night, one goes through death and rebirth in the hells 10,000 times. In just a single morning, one passes through what would be like 100 years of intense agony among humans. Thus one repeatedly troubles the guardians of the hells, driving them to the point of exhaustion. But who now actually believes in the remonstrances of old Yama? When forced to undergo such punishments, one realizes the sufferings. Even though one then feels deep regret over one's transgressions, how could one go back at that point? Later, once set free, one forgets yet again. Then, in one's karmic actions, one behaves just the same way as one did in the past. When one whips the donkey to the point of drawing blood, who could know this is the anguish of my own mother? When one leads away the hog to be butchered, how could one recognize that its pain is that of one's very own elderly father? One could be eating the flesh of one's own son and yet fail to realize it. If this was the case even for King Wen, who was tricked into consuming the flesh of his own relatives, then this would be true for any common person. Those who in years past related to us with kindness and affection may now be acting as our rivals. Those who in earlier days were enemies may now be seen as our very flesh and blood. One's past life mother may be the present life's wife. It may be that he who long ago was a father has now recently becomes one's husband. When someone possessing knowledge of past lives becomes aware of this, he may find it as a basis of chagrin and embarrassment. When one observes it with the heavenly eye, one may find it laughable and pathetic. One endures the difficulty of 10 months in the womb amidst fecal impurities, and passing through the canal of viscous fluids and blood, suddenly turns upside down and descends in a pitiful state. When one is still young, what does one know? One cannot even distinguish east from west. As one grows up and one's consciousness develops, desires then develop. In but a short time, aging and sickness both chase along behind. Then, so swiftly, impermanence arrives yet again. One is roasted in a convergence of elemental wind and fire. One's spirit and consciousness disperse and become muddled. Once one's yin essence and blood have become exhausted, one's skin and flesh dry and wither from without. There is not a single hair pore which does not feel as if reamed by needles. Wherever there is an opening in the body, one feels as if it is stabbed by a knife. When one is preparing a tortoise for stewing, the agony it endures in having its shell ripped off may be said to be relatively easeful. When one's spirit is about to retreat, its discarding of the body is doubly difficult to endure. The mind has no enduring power to control the course of things. It is analogous to a traveling merchant who is forever running off from one place to the next. The bodies which one inhabits have no fixed form. In this they are comparable to houses from which one is forced to move time and time again. Just as with the dust motes of a great chiliocosm, it is difficult indeed to trace back all of one's physical comings and goings. Even were one to take the billowing waves of the four great oceans as a comparison, how could one measure all of the tears which have streamed down because of forced separation from one's loved ones? The towering heap of one's past life skeletons would rise above even those highest of mountains. The immense accumulation of one's fallen corpses would be more massive than the entire great earth. Were it not for hearing the words of the Buddha, who would be able to perceive this matter, and who would be able even to hear of it? If one had not already laid eyes on the scriptures of the Buddha, how could one become aware of this principle, and how could one awaken to its reality? One might otherwise simply fall into relying on one's former affections, and, as always in the past, continue on in delusion and confusion. One could only fear, then, that in the thousands of lives across a myriad kalpas, a single error would become 100 errors. The human body is a difficult thing to gain, but easy indeed to lose. The good times pass by so easily, and then become difficult to retrieve. The road ahead is dark and obscure. Once one becomes separated from the human body, it shall be for a long, long time. The horrible retributions of the three wretched destinies come back around, and one is bound to undergo them oneself. The agony is indescribable. Who would stand in for us then? Now that this flourish of words has reached this point, how could one fail to feel one's heart grow cold? Thus it is now only appropriate that one cut short the stream of cyclic births and deaths, extricate oneself from the ocean of desire, rescue both oneself and others, and climb together onto the other shore. The most excellent form of meritorious service which one might perform in a vast stretch of kalpas is accomplished by doing this one single deed. This is the sixth causal base for the generation of the Bodhi resolve. What is meant by reverence for one's own spiritual mind? One reflects, this presently manifest one mind of mine as it is right now, comparing it to that of Shakyamuni Tathagata, they are not two separate entities. They have nothing distinguishing them. Why then is it that early on the Bhagavan already realized the right enlightenment countless kalpas ago, whereas we are still confused, are still ruled by inverted views, and are still but foolish common people? Additionally, as for the Buddha, the Bhagavan, he embodies countless sorts of spiritual superknowledges and wisdom, while also being adorned with all of the meritorious qualities. We, on the other hand, possess only countless varieties of karmic fetters and afflictions, and remain wholly tied down in the sphere of cyclic births and deaths. The nature of the mind in these two cases is singular. Nonetheless, the difference between confusion and awakening is as vast as the gulf between the heavens and the earth. When one quietly contemplates this, how could one not feel ashamed? This spiritual mind is like a priceless jewel which has become sunken in the mud, and which thus is looked upon just like broken tiles or rubble. We devote no caring concern to it at all. Hence it is only right that we should take up the countless sorts of good dharmas to counter the afflictions. As the meritorious quality of cultivation produces results, the meritorious quality of one's nature will then become manifest. This is comparable to subjecting that jewel to cleaning, and then suspending it aloft in a canopy where its penetrating brilliance shines everywhere. This then may be said to qualify as not failing in gratitude for the teaching of the Buddha, and not turning one's back on one's own spiritual mind. This is the seventh of the causal basis for generation of the Bodhi resolve. What then is intended by repentance of one's karmic obstacles? A sutra states that if one merely transgresses a single dushkrita precept, one will fall into niraya for a period of time equaling 500 years in the heavens of the 4 heavenly kings. If one might undergo such severe retribution for transgressing a minor dushkrita precept, how much the more might this be the case for committing a major transgression? The retribution involved would be difficult even to describe. Now, in the course of our daily lives, in every gesture and every movement, we are continually transgressing the moral precept codes. With every meal and every drink of water, we go against Shila multiple times. Thus, the transgressions committed in a single day would be countless. How much the more so would this be the case for the entire life and throughout the time we have coursed throughout the kalpas? Then the karmic offenses generated would be even more impossible to describe. Additionally, just to discuss this with regard to the 5 precepts, 9 of every 10 persons might be said to have transgressed against them. These transgressions are seldom revealed and are usually concealed. Now, the 5 precepts are referred to as the upasaka's lay precepts. If one is unable to fulfill even those requirements, how much the more would this be the case for the Shramanera, Bhikshu, and Bodhisattva precepts? For those, it would be even less necessary to describe the seriousness of the situation. When one is asked one's name, one replies, "I am a bhikshu." However, were one to inquire into the reality of the matter, then one might not even be qualified to be an upasaka. How could this not be cause for feeling ashamed? One should realize that failing to take the precepts of the Buddha is one thing, but once one has taken them, one must not transgress them. Refraining from transgressing them is one thing, but if one actually does go ahead and transgress against them, then in the end, one will certainly fall. If one fails to take pity on oneself and take pity on others, if one fails to feel regret for oneself while also feeling regret for one's transgressions against others, if one fails, with body and voice intently joined in crying aloud and shedding tears, while seeking in anguish to repent before all beings, then the horrible retributions earned in thousands of lifetimes across myriads of kalpas will be difficult to escape. This is the 8th of the causal basis for generation of the Bodhi resolve. What then is intended by the aspiration to gain rebirth in the Pureland? This refers to the fact that advancing on the path when cultivating in this land is difficult, whereas it is easy to achieve Buddhahood once one has taken rebirth in that land. Because it is easy, one may reach the goal in a single lifetime when there, whereas, because of the difficulties, one may not have reached it even after a series of kalpas when here. It is on account of this that the Aryas of the past and the worthies who were here before us all finally directed themselves thither. In 1,000 scriptures and in a myriad treatises, in place after place, one is directed to return there. As for cultivating a practice in the Dharma-ending age, there are no methods which are able to surpass this one. Now, the Amitabha Sutra states that if one possesses but little goodness, one may fail to achieve that rebirth, whereas if one has accumulated much merit, one may then succeed in arriving there. If one wishes to discuss much merit, then there is no means for gaining it, which can compare with upholding that Buddha's name. If one wishes to speak of goodness, then there is nothing which can compare with generating the vastly magnanimous resolve. Thus it is that if one were to practice maintaining mindfulness of that Arya's name only for a brief period, that would be superior to cultivating the practice of giving for a full 100 years. If one were to generate the great resolve but one time, that would allow one to leap beyond the progress gained from passing through eons of prior cultivation. Now, as for mindfulness of the Buddha, its very root is the aspiration to become a Buddha. Thus, if one fails to generate the great resolve, then, even though one might carry on the practice of mindfulness, how could one expect to succeed? As for generating the resolve, its source lies with cultivating the practices. Were one to fail to achieve rebirth in the Pureland, then, although one might actually generate that resolve, still it could be easy to retreat from it. Thus it is that when one plants the seed of Bodhi, one then tills the mind ground with the plow of mindfulness of the Buddha. As a result, the fruit of the path naturally develops and grows. When one climbs aboard the ship of great vows, one then succeeds in entering the seas of the Pure Land, and then definitely gains rebirth in that region in the West. This is the 9th of the causal basis for generation of the Bodhi resolve. What is meant by causing right Dharma to endure for a long time? This refers to the fact that from countless kalpas ago, right on to the present, our Bhagavan cultivated the Bodhi path for our sakes. He was able to practice what is difficult to practice. He was able to endure what is difficult to endure. The cause became perfect, and the fruit of it became full. Consequently, he arrived at the achievement of Buddhahood. Having succeeded in achieving Buddhahood, and having then concluded his transforming those beings with whom he had affinities, he entered Nirvana. Now, the right Dharma age and the Dharma image age have both entirely expired. There remains only the Dharma ending age, wherein the Dharma continues to exist, but there are no longer people embodying realization of Dharma. The deviant and the correct are no longer distinguished. Right and wrong are no longer discerned. Struggles proliferate between them and us. People are entirely devoted to chasing after prosperity and fame. Wherever one looks, we are inundated with such people. The entire world has become this way. People now do not even recognize who the Buddha is. They do not recognize what is meant by the word Dharma, and they do not realize what is designated by the term Sangha. Matters have now deteriorated to such a miserable state that one can barely bear to speak of this. Whenever one starts to reflect upon it, tears stream down spontaneously. If, as a son of the Buddha, I am unable to repay such kindness, inwardly there shall be no benefit for oneself, and outwardly they shall be no benefit for others. It shall then be the case that while alive, one provides no benefit to anyone during this era, and after one's death, one affords no benefit to those who come along afterwards. In such a case, though the heavens may extend high above, still they remain unable to give me cover. Though the earth may be massive, it remains unable to support me. Then, if a person possessed of the most extremely grave karmic crimes does not apply to me, to whom could it even be applied at all? On account of this, one feels unbearable pain and discerns that there would be no way to escape. Suddenly, one forgets one's inferior qualities and then immediately generates the great resolve. Then, although one remains unable to turn back the Dharma ending process dominating this era, one nonetheless remains determined that he will strive to guard and maintain right Dharma throughout one's future lifetimes. Consequently, joined together with friends devoted to goodness, one arrives along with them at a Bodhi Mandala and arranges the convening of a Kshama assembly. Having set up this Dharma assembly, one then makes the 48 great vows, wherein each and every vow is devoted to bringing beings across to liberation. One sets forth the profound resolve which endures for 100,000 kalpas, and which, in thought after thought, is devoted to becoming a Buddha, making this vow effective from this very day onward to the very end of future time. One vows that when this physical body meets its end, one will return to the land of peace and sustenance, and having ascended through the 9 classes of lotus abodes, one shall return into this Saha world so that the sun of Buddhahood will manifest its shining glory here yet again, so that gateways into Dharma will be expounded once more, so that this world's Sangha sea will be clarified, so that the populations of these eastern regions will receive the transforming teachings, so that the era before the arrival of the inevitable will become extended by this, and so that right Dharma will thus be caused to endure for a long time. This, then, is what I humbly set forth here in the way of genuinely felt and patiently enduring resolve. This is the 10th of the causal basis for generation of the Bodhi resolve. Thus it is that the 10 conditions may be well recognized and the 8 dharmas completely understood. Having accomplished this, one now possesses the gateways through which one can set forth and possesses the grounds upon which one may initiate generation of the Bodhi resolve. Additionally, Once one has gotten this human body, dwells here in the domain of Chinese civilization, wherein the Dharma flourishes, possesses the 6 sense faculties free of any impairment, and enjoys physical health supported by the 4 great elements, abiding in a state of light easefulness. One has equipped oneself with a faith-filled mind and has the great good fortune to be free of demon-inflicted obstacles. This is all the more true for those of us who have also left behind the householder's life and also gained the precepts of complete ordination, have also encountered a Bodhi mandala, have also heard the Buddha's Dharma explained, have also personally viewed the Sharira, have also cultivated the Dharma of repentance, have also met up with the good spiritual friend, and have also become entirely equipped with the superior conditions for success. If one does not now, on this very day, proceed to generate this great resolve, then for which more suitable day could one possibly be waiting? I only pray that the great assembly will take pity on this foolish display of sincerity, will feel sympathy for my deeply felt resolve, will join together in setting forth these vows, and will unite in generating this Bodhi resolve. Those who have not generated it may now generate it. Those who have already generated it may now cause it to develop more fully. Those who have already caused it to develop more fully may now cause it to remain perpetually manifest. Do not, fearing difficulty, shrink back in timidity. Do not, regarding this matter as easy, take it but lightly. Do not, seeking a swift conclusion, fail to make a long enduring commitment. Do not, through indolence, remain bereft of heroic bravery. Do not, on account of being shiftless and spiritless, fail to incite yourself to bold action. Do not, drifting along in customary fashion, continue to put it off for another time. Do not, judging yourself to be foolish and dull-witted, continue depriving yourself of resolve. Do not, possessing only shallow roots of goodness, judge yourself to be an inferior person with no share in this. This endeavor is analogous to the planting of a tree. Once planted, those roots, once shallow, grow deeper each day. This is also analogous to the sharpening of a knife. When one has honed it for a while, that knife, once dull, becomes sharp. How could one, on account of shallow roots, fail to plant the tree, thus allowing it to dry up and die? How could one, on account of the knife's dullness, just set it aside and stop using it? Additionally, if one regards cultivation to be a form of suffering, then one fails to realize that indolence entails even more suffering. In the case of cultivation, one need only be temporarily devoted to diligent effort. Afterwards, one enjoys peace and bliss for an eternity of kalpas. In the case of indolence, one may steal a single lifetime of peacefulness, but then be bound to undergo many lifetimes in suffering. How much the more so is this the case when one employs the Pureland as a ship? What worries could there be that one might retreat? Additionally, once one gains realization of the unproduced Dharma's patience as the source of one's power of endurance, what concerns could remain about any difficulties? One should realize that even those karmic transgressors in the hells generated the Bodhi resolve at some point in kalpas past. How, then, could a son of the Buddha, sharing in the social order of humans, somehow fail to make the great vows in this present life? All across the course of beginningless time, we have been immersed in confusion. Although one cannot plead for changes regarding one's past, nonetheless, were one to awaken now, one might still hope to change the course of the future. As for those who abide in confusion and have not yet awakened, one certainly finds them pitiable. However, it is only in a case where someone comprehends but still fails to act that one is moved to feel especially deep regret. Were one to feel terror over the sufferings of the hells, vigorous effort would naturally arise. Were one to become mindful of the swiftness of the effects of impermanence, indolence would not manifest. Additionally, it is essential to employ the Buddha's Dharma as one might use an instigating whip and to avail oneself of the good spiritual friend as a source of assistance. If one were to refrain from carelessly separating from them, but rather continued such reliance for one's entire life, then there would be no danger of retreating and losing one's way. Do not claim that a single thought is insignificant. Do not hold the opinion that empty vows are devoid of any benefit. If one's mind abides in truth, then one's endeavors will be genuine. If one's vows are vast in their scope, then one's practice will be profound. It is not the case that empty space qualifies as great. Rather, it is the mind, king, which qualifies as great. It is not the case that Vajra really qualifies as durable. Rather, it is the power of vows which is the most durable. If the great assembly is truly able to refrain from casting aside my pronouncements, then, based on this, the congregation destined towards Bodhi may join together. Thus, the alliance of a Lotus Society may be formally initiated from this very time. As for what we have vowed to achieve, it is for all of us together to gain rebirth in the Pure Land, for all of us together to see Amitabha Buddha, for all of us together to engage in the teaching of beings, and for all of us together to perfect the right enlightenment. This being the case, how can one know that our future attainment of the 32 marks, with their hundredfold adornment of merit, is not a result inaugurated on this very day by this generating of the Bodhi resolve and by this declaration of vows? I wish now to offer encouragement to everyone in the Great Assembly. This is so extremely fortunate, so extremely fortunate.